Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feed Stuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Joining us today is Dr. Al Kertz, and we're going to address the question of whether providing a colostrum replacement is beneficial beyond initial feeding. Welcome, Dr. Kertz. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Glad to be back.
For those of you that are tuning in today, if you have any questions for Dr. Kertz as we go through this, be sure to post those there on the screen. If you're joining us from social media, you can post those questions directly in your social channels. So, Dr. Kertz, why don't I just turn it over to you and take it from there?
Okay, let's start with a little background. Colostrum is generally referred to as the first milking after a cow has a calf. And if you can look at the graph, you can see how the composition of colostrum changes from that first milking until about 3 days later. And its primary difference is, if you notice at very first, at 0 days or 0 hours, the highest component is total solids, but within the total solids, the highest component is protein. And that's because it's very high in immunoglobulins. And that's what the calf needs to absorb in order to have antibody protection. It's something unique to ruminants. They aren't born with it. They have to absorb it through the colostrum. Now, transition milk is generally referred to as that for the first 3 days. And back in the 1970s, there was a standard recommendation and practice that you not only fed colostrum, but you feed the transition milk for 3 days. And one of the reasons for that was because transition milk really doesn't meet the legal definition of milk. But then as dairy farms got larger, they started taking the transition milk, or not separating it, and included it in the bulk tank, and it made no real difference in the composition of the overall milk because it was such a small part of the milk pool. Or the other thing that began to happen is, as we had hospital groups of cows, then that milk was combined with the transition milk, and that should have been pasteurized, most cases it was, and that was begun to be fed to calves. So that all occurred in the 70s and then has changed since then. So now if we look at what happens if you don't feed transition milk, or in this case, if you feed a colostrum replacer instead. So that's the approach used in this study that we're going to review, University of Guelph. And it was done with a very large herd of 1,600 cows. I didn't even know there was that large a herd in Canada, because they have a milk quota system which generally keeps the herd size smaller. But having that many cows means that they can get a number of calves in a short period. So from June 2021 to August 2021, they enrolled Holstein heifer calves in this study. They were not allowed to suckle from the cow, so they did not get any colostrum directly from the cow. And then they fed 3.2 liters of a bovine-derived colostrum replacer, and that had 205 grams of IgG, so it was 29% IgG and 22% fat. And they did that within an hour after birth by an esophageal tube. So, and then in addition, all calves received a second feeding, like the first feeding, 12 hours later. And then the calves, there were 200 in total, were randomly allocated to one of several treatments. Either 450 grams of a milk replacer, which was a 27 protein, 19% fat, and that was fed from day 2 to 14, and that was the control, so straight milk replacer, or 380 grams of the colostrum replacer, plus 225 grams of milk replacer from day 2 to 3, then 450 grams of milk replacer from day 4 to 14. So this second group then got the high dose of colostrum replacer right away, and then went strictly in milk replacer. Then the third group had 45 grams of colostrum replacer with 450 grams of milk replacer from day 2 to 14, or 380 grams of the colostrum replacer plus 225 grams of milk replacer from day 2 to 3, then 45 grams of colostrum after that. And then they were bottle fed twice daily. The weaning protocol was that they were fed 600 grams of milk replacer, reconstituted 4 liters twice daily, and then they began a weaning process at day 42 and followed and finished at day 49. They were also fed a calf starter, 21%, 22% protein. It didn't indicate whether it was a pellet or texturized, and free choice water. So we have different treatments where there's no colostrum replacer fed. Most of the colostrum replacer is fed right up front, or some of it is fed over extended period. So if we look at table 1, we can see how the composition varied somewhat. The control only had 1.85% fat. That was on a liquid basis, and 3.88 protein. You see that the transition had a higher fat protein, and the extended was intermediate fat and protein, and then the colostrum replacer fed over time had the highest fat and protein. Osmolality went from about 400 to 500. And that's about as high as you want to go, because if that gets too high, you're going to have osmotic effect and diarrhea. And then the IgGs, of course, there was none in the control. And then the others you see there. And then the calculated energy, there was some difference there. However, if we look at table 2, what we find out is that the way they fed this, that there was really no difference in nutrient levels among the treatments. So that's a key point. So any response would not be due to difference in nutrient levels among the treatments. So we see that the starter intake across treatments was very low, didn't vary, 0.33, 0.37. And that's because if you look at the milk replacer intake on a dry basis, it was 2.6 pounds. So that's a very high level of feeding. So you're not going to get much starter intake with that high level of feeding. And the energy intake, of course, was by design very similar. So energy and nutrient intake was similar. If you look at the weaning transition, that was day 43 to 49. Starter intake was similar, a little lower as you got out to the 3rd and 4th treatment. And milk replacer intake was about the same, and energy intake very similar. So now let's look at figure 1. We have the 4 treatments, and that's those 4 columns you see. And this is average daily gain. And the details are down below in the figure, but you can look at that later. We're not going to walk through that. And what you see is there's a stair-step effect at week 1. So there was a difference in average daily gain during week 1, and that is when they got the colostrum replacer fed at a higher level or for a longer period of time, they got an increased daily gain. In week 2, you see that the 3rd and 4th treatment are about the same, and then it starts jumping around a bit as you go to week 3, 4, 5, and 6. And of course, 7 is right before they begin the weaning transition. So there is some carryover effect, but it looks like the main effect was in the first week on daily gain. But that's not the only factor we're concerned about here. So if we look at figure 2 and 3, we see that in 2, they did a statistical evaluation of diarrhea occurring during the first 21 days. And when they were supplemented with the extended treatment of colostrum replacer, there was a greater survival of the calves than the control calves. So that's the figure 2. Now, if we look at figure 3, we see that that's where they're looking at the effect on probability of calves surviving the pre-weaning period. So there's some effect there as well. So there's some health effects besides the daily gain effects. Now, colostrum replacers can be used in various ways. One of the ways that they can be used, other than this, is if you're in a situation on a dairy where it doesn't work well for you to get colostrum to the calves. And that might be because it's a weekend shift or it's a night shift. And there's one example I include in the text. It was a large dairy with a pivot point irrigation system, a grazing dairy. It was with jerseys. And the layout was such that the jerseys calved in one location, and then the calves were moved to calf facilities in another location. And there was a high mortality rate. So the manager decided, well, rather than trying to provide the colostrum to these calves from the cows, and which with the logistics wasn't possible to do it very well, he fed a colostrum replacer. And that worked very well, especially compared to what the alternative was. But then the owner got concerned. Why was he spending all this money on colostrum replacers? Because it was like $25 a calf. So he called the manager in and they had a consultation, and the manager said, well, here's what we were getting when we weren't using a colostrum replacer, and there's no way we can really live with that kind of mortality and disease issues. So the owner reluctantly agreed that that was the best alternative under the conditions. So that's another example of how colostrum replacer can be used. But if we look at the bottom line in this study, for the short period of higher amounts of colostrum replacement or for an extended period, there was some beneficial effects in daily gain and lesser effects on diarrhea and mortality. So if you look at the cost-benefit relationship, you'd really have to do that on an individual dairy basis because the cost is going to vary and your situation, circumstances will vary. So it's not possible to give a blanket recommendation, but this does indicate that there is a possible way of providing some upfront situations where you can't feed colostrum. You can feed the colostrum replacer and get some beneficial effects from that as well.
So, Al, great information. Do you think that perhaps there might be a difference between, say, Jerseys and Holsteins and different breeds? Or is this pretty much, you think you'd see that across the board?
There might be. This herd was all Holsteins, so this would apply to them. But the other situation I was talking about was with Jerseys, where they were in a grazing situation. And so it was beneficial for them to use the colostrum replacer because they really couldn't do a good job of getting the colostrum directly from the cow to the calves because of their physical layout. So there's one example from both breeds, so I don't think there would really be that much difference between those two breeds.
Okay. A reminder, if you have any questions for Dr. Kertz, to post those there in the your chat, either social media or our online chat. So, Dr. Kertz, as we always like to ask, what would you say is the bottom line in all of this?
I think this is another tool for dairy farms to look at. If you're having issues getting colostrum to your calves in a timely manner or in a clean manner, or as I said, if you've got issues with a weekend shift or a night shift that's not able to do a good job of feeding colostrum, this is an alternative to consider, and then you'd have to look at the cost benefit relationship for your particular operation.
So another tool in the toolbox for when you might need it.
Yes.
Very good. Well, Dr. Kertz, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to seeing you next month. If you'd like to see Dr. Kertz's column on this topic, it is there posted in your feed, or you can go to feedstuffs.com. Good to see you, Dr. Kertz.
Thank you.
Likewise, great to see all of you, and thank you for joining us. A reminder that all Feedstuffs 365 sessions are available in on-demand format on feedstuffs.com. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.